Cosy, how are you? Welcome to the Candlelit Tales podcast and this series of stories for the dark. In this episode, Circa is telling a love story about a longing for a place that may or may not exist. An island sometimes called Atlantis and sometimes called Hy Brasil. This podcast is brought to you by our supporters at Patreon. You can join them over at patreon.com/Candlelit Tales or make a one-time donation to the PayPal button on our website. Like and share, and above all, enjoy. For now, Circa, tell us a story.
Hy Brasil. There was a fisherman who lived out west. In the west of Ireland, where the sky is silver and the sea is silver, and they seem on the horizon to meld into one another like a single shimmering sheet. He spent his days there, on the water and on the coast. And times were sometimes good, but more often than that, times were hard. Where there had been fish before, there were no fish now. Where things had been easy and plentiful, things were now pinched and hard. And one of the things that this man liked best to do, this fisherman, was to look out west as far as his eye could see, where the ocean and the sky met and that silver blended into one. Because sometimes, out at the edge of the horizon, you could almost see a place. An island or a cloud or a trick of the light. It's hard to say. But he had his theory. He had his story. And it was a story well known to certain people in the west of Ireland. That out there where the ocean and the sky meet, there is a land that is perfect. An island that appears and disappears. And it has been said many times that it has been found, but only ever found once. And once found, it cannot be found again. And some say that those lost at sea are not lost, but have found this place, this Hy Brasil, this wonderful, perfect land of ease and plenty. A land where no one wants for anything, where there's no sickness, no disease, no sorrow. Now this man, this fisherman, he knew these stories. He'd heard them since he was a child. He'd heard them told when there were fierce storms or wrecks or people lost, that perhaps they were not lost but found. He'd heard them spun, and he'd heard them whispered, and he'd heard this island come up again and again. There were old maps, some said, where the island was marked in ancient ink at the edge before the lands of mystery and monsters. There it was, in the middle of the Atlantic, Hy Brasil, an island that some say sank to the bottom of the ocean and others say never sank. But it is never quite there. It is always at the edge of where ocean and sky meet and everything is silver. And it comes and goes as it pleases. And it stays and it waits for no one. And if ever anyone finds their way to that island, to the wonderful Hy Brasil, they must make a choice. Because if they stay, they will live there forever, in a land without sorrow. But if they leave, and bring word of it, and hope of it, back to their home shores, they may never come back. They may never find their way to it again. Now, it seemed to this fisherman that time was not turning in the way that the seasons turn. Usually, bad times, hard times, were followed by good times, as spring follows winter. But it seemed to him that everything was getting darker and darker and darker still. And at the end of the darkness, there was no light. There was nothing to look forward to. Only more of the same. More war. More suffering. More sickness, more death. More of the pinch, as each coin he brought to market bought him less than the last had. Less of everything. Less fish in the sea. Even the ocean itself seemed to be shrinking and curdling, going sour. Its bounty that had once seemed everlasting, now coming to an end, a hard end. And beyond it, nothing but more hardship, smaller catches. And on he saw his life laid out ahead of him, day after bleak day, rising hopeless and striving all day long, sleeping exhausted to rise hopeless again and grind again, and sleep again and rise again. And it never getting better, and it never breaking. And even as he knew the sky would lighten, the warmth would come back into the world, that did not seem a comforting thought. All he could think of were the bad times ahead. Lean spring and a sour summer with too much heat, too little laughter. And everything around him, his family, his friends, all the things that had seemed a pleasure and a joy to him in times before, they now seemed hollow. He did the things he had once enjoyed. He went walking with a friend along the cliffs. He met someone that he had loved to share stories with, to share stories by the fire, to share a drink, to share companionship. He played music, picking it up, slipping in with other musicians. But everything felt like a hollow dance, as though while his mouth was smiling and laughing and making music and making words, just behind it was his true face, not smiling, not laughing, but silently weeping. But because the mask was so good, because he had made it so good, none of his friends could tell the difference. None of them could see. None of them knew that he was a hollow man, moving through the motions, with nothing to animate him but habit, and a low fear that if he stopped, if he stayed in bed, if once he decided not to do the things he'd always done, that he would never, ever rise again. Sometimes that did not seem so bad. He thought, if it were that simple, well, he would do it. Go to sleep and not wake up. Stay in bed forever. Never move. Never have to breathe. Never have to feel his face smiling while inside he wept. And in the depth of his misery, that barely felt miserable anymore, but only felt routine, he remembered the stories, the tales of Hy Brasil, of that beautiful country, warm and inviting, a place of abundance and plenty, a place where the fruit and the flower was on the tree all year round, where there was only soft sunshine and soft dew in the morning. And he decided to look for it. It gave him something to get up for in the morning, something to strive for when he went out in his boat. Because as he knew his catch would be meagre, that was fine now, because the catch was not the point. It was a byproduct of the search, and the search was for Hy Brasil. The search was for that place where everything would be perfect, where no one's neighbour's voice was harsh in his ear, where everyone who was there was agreeable to everyone else who was there, where there was no conflict and no strife, and no war, and no hardship, and all was ease, and all was wonderful. He could picture it in his mind. It seemed a dream. It seemed far away. And as he strove for it, and as he searched for it, some days it seemed farther away than it ever had before, and other days he swore he could almost see it. He could see out there farther than he'd been before, just beyond the farthest out he dared to go, appearing and disappearing as it pleased. And then one day, all he had in mind was to catch a glimpse. He had found that just catching a glimpse would sustain him for a few more days, for a few more mornings that he rose cold and tired and ground his way through his day. A glimpse would keep him going, like a sip of water in a desert. And so he went out minded only to find a glimpse. And as he rowed out, and as he cast his nets, for he had learned to row and cast his nets and then look. Before he looked, he felt the bottom of his boat scrape on sand. And when he looked up, he was there. He was there on a shore that should not have been where it was. He knew where he was. He had been in this spot before many times, and there was no island there. But here he was. And he pulled his boat up onto that white sandy shore, and he started to explore. Hy Brasil was everything he had heard that it would be. It was everything that he had dreamed of himself. The beauty of the place could not be overstated. Not only trees with flowers and fruit on the bough at the same time, but flowers carpeted across the grass. Beautiful beaches sloping down to gently lapping seas. That silvery light, it seemed like he was walking through it, and that everything had a shimmer to it. And as he walked on, he heard in the distance voices, and he could not tell if they were singing or laughing, but they were joyous, and they lifted his heart with the sound as he walked. And as he stepped on, his feet sank into that flowered carpet of grass, and it was softer than any rug he'd ever felt before. He bent down to it, he put his hands in it, he pressed his face to it to breathe in the scent of those flowers, those fruits, that soft sunshine. And he felt his heart lighten in him. And he knew that he had found it. He had found the land of ease. He had found a place where his sorrows would never trouble him again, where there would be no more death, No more loss, no more war, no more struggle, and no more strife. And even as he thought through all of the things there would be no more of, he remembered. There would be no more walks along the cliff with that friend. There would be no more playing in the shebeen with those musicians. There would be no more sharing stories. Not with the people that he knew. Not with his own. There might be new people in this place, and maybe there would be some that he would grow to love as much as he loved his family and his friends at home. But he didn't know them yet. The people of Hy Brasil. The lost sailors, and maybe the seekers like himself. And so he waited by the shore, with his fingers in that soft, luxurious grass, with the boat on the strand behind him, and his own nets, and the few fish that he could catch. And behind him was home. And before him was Hy Brasil, with all its promise. And so he stood. And for a time, he was suspended there, as if between two worlds. And he knew in his heart that if he left, he would never find this shore again. But if he did not leave, he would never see those he loved again. And as he stayed there, on that grass, on that soft carpet, he began to remember things that it seemed he'd been unable to think of for a long time. What joy he had known, truly known, back at home, when he was not wearing a smiling mask, half a breath in front of his weeping face, when the music brought him true happiness, when walking with friends, talking with friends, smiling at sweethearts, being around others, being by himself, going about his tasks, when these things had not seemed hopeless, but purposeful and meaningful and good. And how, in times long ago, though they seemed far away now, he had been able to do his work, knowing that the world was a place of chaos and destruction and occasional disaster, and knowing that his corner of it was small. But there were some things in his control. He sat on the grass of Hy Brasil. He breathed in its silvery air. He watched the birds swoop and chatter in the trees, butterflies flutter in front of his face. He heard the soft music of the island, or maybe the islanders, drifting on the wind. And as he breathed deeply, he said to himself that as a glimpse of the island had sustained him for days, he would let this sustain him for the rest of his life. And he would bring it back with him. That silver light, that hope. And he would share it with those he loved, to remind them that even when the darkness keeps getting darker and darker, and there is no break in the clouds, there is always more. There is always tomorrow. This podcast was produced and edited by Oisin Ryan and Alan Homan, with music by Oisin Ryan and Alan Homan. You can find out more about us on our website, candlelittales.ie.
And we're on all social media, so like and follow us on Facebook, Instagram and Twitter at Candlelit Tales, or send us a message or get onto our mailing list.
For more videos and live streams, like and subscribe to our Candlelit Tales YouTube channel, which now has a Candlelit Tales for Kids playlist. Hashtag CandleLittleTales.
Liking and subscribing to our channel really helps us grow and get to more people. And if you're able to give us more direct support, you can chip in a few bob at patreon.com/Candlelit Tales, or make a one-time donation through the PayPal button on our website.
We also do really like to hear back from you with your questions and requests, so please feel free to contact us directly or leave your question in the comments section below, because what we really want to do is get these stories out there, share them with as many people as possible, so anything you can do to help, we really appreciate.
And we really appreciate you listening. Gurb Mila Malgut.